everybody. Thanks for joining me. Hi, Jim. Nice to see that you can be on the chat tonight. Oops. All right. So this is just for students of the course and people that are members of the YouTube channel. So thank you to you guys for supporting my business. And this is going to be a much smaller group. So feel free to put whatever you like in the comments, questions you have about the class, about things you've seen in my videos, about your bees. I was going to talk about Varroa because it's a big question that I get from students, especially when you're first getting your bees and your hive is small and you don't know if it's too soon to treat. And also, it's nice to see you're watching the class and hearing me say to test for mites, but with a hive so small, it doesn't seem like it would be a great idea to potentially harm, the small population with a mite test. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And then I have a question from one of my students who is considering putting beehives on someone else's property and had questions for me about it, like how to go about all the logistics of dealing with beehives on property that you do not own. And most of my beehives have been on. Let me make myself, whoops, now I'm shorter. Most of the time my bees have been on other people's property. The few times they were on my property, it didn't go great. So I had them on other people's property, and the first house I owned was just 5-6 years ago. And it was less than a quarter acre, that house in Hawaii that I was always filming my videos at. And it was not zoned for ag use. And we had a very not friendly neighbor behind us. And so he would have he called the police on our next door neighbor when she put up bushes. So there's a really good chance he would have called the police on us if we put beehives on the property. So he also sprayed Roundup like crazy. It wouldn't have been a great spot for them anyway. So, okay. When it comes to Varroa, the main things I just want to really make sure everyone knows about is that your first year, I always recommend to people, it might be possible to keep your bees treatment-free where you're living. I really want to talk to a lot of treatment-free beekeepers, maybe do some interviews on YouTube with them, because it really runs the gamut when it comes to being treatment-free. But I always tell people in their first and second year, make it your goal to keep your bees alive for 12 full months. Just make that your goal. Don't try to get too complicated with the treatment-free, because it is a really common cause for honeybees to collapse, is the Varroa mite. So although we all want to be treatment-free beekeepers, I wouldn't shoot for that your first year. Even if you're seeing mite counts of 0 or 1 on a mite test, I don't recommend saying my mite test came back with 0 or 1. I don't have to treat. I only have to treat when my mite count is high. And the reason why I tell people those first couple of years is because there's the potential that you are just not doing the test properly, or that it was just a fluke that time and your mite count is still high. And so even like when I talked to Randy Oliver from scientificbeekeeping.com, a great website if you've never checked it out. He is trained biologist. That's what he went to school for, but now has thousands of, well, maybe just hundreds of hives. And he does a lot of testing when it comes to treatments and, just trying to really get down to the bottom of what actually works and what doesn't work in beekeeping, as opposed to just going with his gut or what he's always seen. And so What he said is that even if his hives have a 0 or 1 mite count, he still puts in a treatment until that hive is having a 0 or 1 mite count, like month after month after month after month. You have to get at least like 4 mite tests of a 0 for him to be convinced that this hive is dealing with mites on their own and they have a low mite count and therefore do not need a treatment. Otherwise, uh, the first year or two, I recommend just treating because you're just trying to keep your bees alive and then you're going to work from there. And when it comes to dealing with Varroa, it's not crazy complicated, but there are things that can happen that can cause a hive to collapse along the way. But really, it's just like these three things you need to do. You need to treat in the early spring or when your hive is small and getting out of the overwintering phase and the queen is laying, it's warm enough out for you to open the hive, and you have at least 4 frames of brood. That's when you put in one treatment. Because, your beehive is going to have 8 or so frames of brood, maybe 6 if you're working with an 8 frame box. And then you're going to put another box on top of that, and they're going to put more brood on top of that. So you have some time. These treatments are in for 6 weeks usually. You have some time for the treatment to be in while the bees are growing and the population's increasing, that the treatment can be in, and you are just lowering your varroa mite levels, because when the honey really starts to come in, there's lots of flowers blooming, which is late spring, early summer, midsummer. You don't want to put in a treatment because you have a mite count of 5 or 7, or God forbid, even higher than that. Is your oxalic acid, they say it's not destroying the honey, but it's still not recommended to treat with honey supers on your beehive, no matter what treatment you're using. Not just because it can be tainting the honey and the comb, but also because treatments aren't always that effective when there is that extra box on the beehive. A lot of treatments work by the scent filling up the hive, and the bees don't like the scent, so they try to carry it out. And when that happens, that treatment gets on them and they pass it around through the hive. It gets spread through the hive. Some treatments are just on strips that are in the brood, which has lots of bees walking around on it, and it gets spread that way. But the more condensed your hive is, the easier and the more effective your treatment's going to be for the most part. So, and I'll talk a little bit later about organic treatments versus non-organic, and then ways you can lower varroa mite levels without having to put in a treatment. But first of all, it's just you want that spring treatment, not when your hive is still small, not when you just installed them, but once you have at least 4 frames of brood, you can put in a treatment and you're going to have some time. You're not going to worry about tainting the honey because your bees are still going to be building up a good box and a half of baby bees before they move on to filling up supers. And then you have the honey flow and you have all these flowers blooming. And that's when you don't want to have to treat, and you shouldn't. If you find that you have really high mite levels, you're doing a test on a different hive every month or every other month, and you're finding high mite levels, and I would say a high mite level would be 4 or higher when you're doing a sampling of a half a couple bees. If you're getting a sampling count of counting 4 or more mites from your test, that means that your varroa mite levels increased quite a bit really fast. That's very bad, and you should definitely move your beehives. Maybe not immediately, but at the very least next year. Don't keep your bees there, because there must be like a commercial apiary or somebody with beehives that's maybe not doing anything, and their bees, it's a breeding ground for mites. What I found is that my mite levels increased quite a bit really fast when a commercial apiary would put their bees near one of my yards. So then once you harvest your honey, or it's at the time when you're seeing with your inspections that the amount of frames of honey is staying the same, not really increasing much, that's when you will be harvesting. Or if you don't have enough honey, you might just be leaving it in the hive. And that's when you do your second treatment. For most people, it's late summer, it's August, maybe early September. And the warmer climates, in the southern states, that might be a little bit later in the year. But whenever it comes to beekeeping, if you're not sure with timing, earlier is always better than later. Because it's always better to be a little bit too early than too late. And it's the case with Varroa. When you want to treat just the second time is late summer, because the queen's going to be laying eggs for the winter bees. These winter bees are different than the rest of the bees in the hive. They have different fat deposits. They live longer. They are going to be alive for like 6 months, taking the bees through winter. So you want these bees to not have varroa mites eating them, you know? Uh, so if you put the treatment in too early, it's not bad because the varroa mite levels are lowered before, their pupa. But if you put it in too late and these mites are already in the cells with the pupa having babies and the babies are eating the pupa, it doesn't matter if you put in a treatment before you close the hive up. This is like the most important time to treat a beehive is that late summer for your winter bees, because nothing else matters. If those winter bees are sick, if they have deformed wings, lots of viruses, if they're not strong because they had so many mites, just like attacking them while they were pupating, they will not be able to properly cluster up and take the hive through winter. So a really telltale sign that your winter bees were sick and had a varroa infestation is that the hive collapses early on in the winter. In those first few cold nights that you get, they weren't strong enough to cluster up to produce enough heat to keep the hive alive. And the hive is like 92 degrees, is what they need to keep the brood when there is brood present. But when there isn't brood present, which might be the case at that time of year, like the early winter, late fall, they don't need to keep the hive that warm. So if they can't even keep the hive at like 60 degrees, then they're really weak and they definitely they weren't healthy, and that's mostly due to varroa mites. And then, of course, most people will put one more treatment in before they close the hive up. If you're afraid it's too late, you can always just like use a vaporizer. You don't even have to open the hive for that. You can dribble oxalic acid in with a syringe. There's a great video from Better Bee, I believe it is, that shows that, where it's just like one person, you don't even take the boxes apart. One person just holds the front handle so that the back of the box is still attached, but the front of the box is just open a little bit. Another person takes the syringe and just squeezes the oxalic acid mixture in between the frames. And it's really fast and not that difficult to do. You just want a day when it's not like below 65 degrees out. You want a day when it's low wind and kind of warm out so that you can just dribble that in there. So those are the important things I want you guys to know, is that even if you're seeing a mite count of 0 or 1, you want to see that mite count for like at least 3-4 mite tests before you are confident that that hive does not need a treatment. 2, there are 3 times a year you want to treat to lower your varroa mite levels, and that would be spring, late summer, and fall. And especially with that late summer treatment, it doesn't matter when other times you treated, your hive can still collapse if you had no treatment in to keep those winter bees healthy when the queen was laying them. Now, for you guys in warmer climates, like when I was in Hawaii, this does not pertain to you because you can treat whenever you see your mite levels get high, so to prevent them from absconding. But when it comes to people in colder climates, when your winter bees are actually being made and they need to really do their job, they need to be healthy. And so that second late summer treatment is crucial. But okay, so on to a little bit more specifics. When it comes to the springtime, there's a lot of different treatments you can use, and um, there's organic and organic. Really, there's just just like pick one when it comes to what to use. When there's temperature restrictions for some of them, like the formic and the apagard, so you really have to go by the packaging when it comes to whether you can use it if it's too hot. Especially for the formic, you don't want to use it if it is too hot out. And the formic acid is, well, first, the oxalic acid is always recommended as the late fall treatment because it works really well when there is absolutely no brood present. Um, Formic acid, I really don't recommend using right before you close your hive up for winter. Because if your queen is a little on the older side or not incredibly strong, it is possible for a hive to go queenless when you put formic acid in. And when you do that in the spring or summer, it's not a huge problem. You can always go buy another queen, but you cannot do that in the late winter, fall, or late fall, early winter when you're getting ready to close up the hive. It might be too late. Maybe you can have one shipped from Hawaii, but that's not ideal. So just there's a couple things you don't want to do. Is you don't want to use formic acid right before you close your hive up for the winter. You don't want to use formic acid if it is really hot out. You're going to have to check with the exact temperature restrictions for that. A lot of people like to use formic in the springtime. I usually try to avoid, I don't use formic acid a lot, to be honest. I try to avoid it in the early spring because I've also found that it messes with the laying of the queen. And in the springtime, what the bees are trying to do is increase the population so that when all the flowers start blooming, they are ready and they have lots of bees that can go gather lots of honey. And the formic acid and apagard, they mess with the pheromones in the hive, so it can deter the queen from laying as much as she really should be. Sorry, put my phone on do not disturb. um, Now there's a new treatment out that's called Varroxan, or it's time released oxalic acid strips. So in the past, to put oxalic acid into the hive, you either had to mix it with like glycerin or something and put it in a syringe and put it in the hive, or you had to put it in like a vaporizer and release the fumes into the hive. But now they have it in strips, which is like these like time release strips. So it's in the hive for 6 weeks, just like formic acid and apagard is. And that is really great. I am going to try that out this year because what that allows the beekeeper to do is, one, there's a whole lot less user error with the oxalic acid, because using that vaporizer, there's a lot of potential for things to not go right. And if there is still brood present, you're going to have to continue to put it in the hive every week for a few weeks in order to get that emerging brood. But as far as they're aware, they have not found that any varroa mites are developing like an immunity to it. And so it is still incredibly effective at killing varroa mites. And so if it also is okay for use if you have honey supers on your hive. It goes in the brood section. So it really seems like the best new treatment option for beekeepers, and it's organic. The Apavar, I also bought some Apavar and I bought some Apagard because I'd like to try them all out and make videos for you guys about them. Apavar used to be my favorite treatment. It is so easy to use. It does not bother the queen. It does not bother the brood. It's really the best treatment to use in the springtime. It has no temperature restrictions. The only thing is that it is non-organic, and now they're finding that their mites are developing resistance to it. And so that was really A big question of mine when people were talking about that email from the American Beekeeping Federation, or forget the exact name of that group, when they were talking about how the commercial beekeepers were finding about a 50% hive loss already in February. Um, in in Hawaii, right before my daughter was born was when I was finding. So that was like 3.5, 4 years ago. I was finding that the mites were not really responding to putting apivar in the hive. And I was wondering if that was really what was happening on the mainland and why a lot of commercial beekeepers were losing their hives. And that's really why you want to do these mite tests, because you just want to know, how are your hives dealing with mites on their own? How fast are they? Is their mite count increasing over the months? And what how is the mite count changing after I put a treatment in? Because this isn't going to stop you from putting a treatment in the spring, or probably not even in the summer, but it's really good to just have these notes so that you can make just better informed decisions for next year and the year after, and when you're purchasing treatments for next year. um, it's Some beekeepers choose to not do my test and to just put a treatment in, and whatever happens happens. And I know that's what a lot of the commercial apiaries do, especially when you have thousands of hives, tens of thousands of hives. But that's really not the best way to keep your bees. And that's the benefit of being a hobby beekeeper, is that you can really give the proper attention to your hives. Then you know unfortunately, those commercial apiaries cannot. Um, Shannon says, I used Apivar in 2 hives in late summer, too hot for Formic. One of those hives crashed and the other is questionable. Thanks for the tip about multiple zero counts before believing it. Yeah, that can just be a real problem. And you can't just do it once and assume that, that's the way it is. You really have to do it at least, like, have a 0 or 1 count 3 or 4 times. And that's what Randy had told me, and would I have chosen to go by as well. Now, in Hawaii, I usually treated once a year in January, December into January, and the honey season started in February. And that was enough for me. I wouldn't have to treat again in the year after doing mite tests. But then, right around when I was finding that the Apivar wasn't effective, um, it just I had to treat like all the time. And I really, the mite levels, a friend who had a commercial apiary said that he was losing a lot of hives and he was having real trouble bringing down the mite levels in his hives. So I really think that resistance to the apivar was really taking effect there. And it's going to vary, you know, area to area, whether it's going to be that case for you as well. Okay, so now moving on to some better things is the when can we stop treating and do we have to treat? And for some of you, you might not have to. It partially just depends on where you are located, how close you are to other bees. It's unfortunate that you do have to treat 3 times, but what happens is that you treat in the late summer because you really want those winter bees healthy. And then the late summer is when a lot of the flowers die off and it gets really hot and dry, and the bees start robbing each other. And robbing not only can cause hives to collapse, but it causes the transfer of Varroa mites like crazy, because robber bees come into your hive, and Varroa mites are going to jump onto the back of a bee in your hive and not stay on that bee potentially. And now you just have all of these new mites in your hive again. And on scientificbeekeeping.com, he has these like numbers, and he'll show you how in the late summer and early fall, the honeybee population starts to plummet quite a bit, like really fast. And the varroa mite levels are just like going like this. So you have this like X shape where you have honeybee population going down, rural mite levels going up, and it's just like a recipe for disaster for these poor honeybees. Um, I did have interesting some facts about Varroa mites that I want to share with you. What I find like really interesting is that Varroa mites are actually dependent on honeybees for survival, which is, to a certain extent, it is uh, um, makes you think that treatment free beekeeping should be possible, because it just doesn't make sense for this mite to cause the demise of the honeybees if they need them so much. But over 95% of varroa mites in your hive are hidden in the cells with the pupating bees. The females go in there right before the cell is capped. They lay their eggs, and these babies hatch, and they feed off of the pupa. They mate with their brothers and sisters, and then they have babies, and there's like multiple life cycles. So that's why they love the drone pupa the most, because the cells are the biggest, and they go into the biggest cells they can find, because the bigger the cell, the longer it's going to take to pupate, which is why some people had started to work on the smaller cell foundation, because they figured that the smaller the bees, the shorter the pupation, and the fewer the varroa mites that can reproduce. But varroa mites do not actually consume the blood of honeybees. They live off of the fat body of the bee. I run in parentheses equivalent of the something in humans, but I cannot cannot read my own writing. Anyway, those are some interesting things about the varroa mites. So, what I did to lower varroa mite levels without needing treatment, and when it comes to the treatment-free decision for the beekeeper, there's different ways you can go. There are some beekeepers that say, I do not want to intervene at all. And that is because they want bees to deal with it. The hives that deal with it on their own are the ones that should thrive, and the ones that cannot deal with varroa mites should perish and not be able to breed. And that makes a lot of sense. But then there are the people that are treatment free in that they do not put a treatment into the hive, like oxalic acid or formic acid, but they will use integrated pest management techniques to lower varroa mite levels naturally. So they are intervening, just not with a treatment. Now, like from that scientific beekeeping approach, he is trying to become not just treatment free, but to the point that he doesn't have to intervene. But what he says is that you have varroa mites, that you have beehives that deal with varroa mites well on their own. And what they do is they will actually pull out infected brood and take them out of the hive, and they are maybe more hygienic, and they just have the genetics to deal with varroa mites well on their own. And these are the hives that he wants to breed, but you can't just breed that hive. Once you have a hive like that, you can't just like make a whole bunch of queens and distribute them, and now you'll have lots of hives like that, because that queen, her unique genetics, is only going to be half of the genetics of the babies that she makes and the queens that are going to be made from her. So for every one queen that you have that has a hive with these good genetics, you're not going to be making, an infinite amount of hives with these good genetics. On top of that, she mated with a whole bunch of drones, and some of those drones have those genetics, but not all of them. So, all the worker bees in the hive, they are not full sisters of each other. They are only half sisters of a lot of the other worker bees in the hive. So it's not that clear cut when it comes to breeding bees for these genetics. He's working on it, but they're really not there with the queen breeding operations. And so if you are going to intervene, there are ways you can lower the levels without having to get to the point to put treatments in. One thing I do is I don't put foundation into my beehives. I let the bees build honeycomb. And it's really important if you do this that your hive bee level and that you don't allow more than that bee space. So a 10 frame box needs 10 frames in that box. You can't space it out with 9 frames until like they've drawn out the comb on all those 9 frames. Then you can space it out because you don't have to worry about cross comb and the bees building comb that's attaching frames together and stuff. So that isn't really proven that that helps with the varroa mite levels, but it makes it easier for me because it allows the hive to make as many drones as they want. Some hives make a ton, and some hives make very little. And you can just buy the dream, the green drone foundation, and your hive will make drones. But you can also just put frames in that have no foundation or a little starter strip of beeswax foundation or a little popsicle stick at the top, and you can let them build what they want. I prefer to let them build what they want because if they don't need drones or they don't want drones, then they don't have to use it for that. And some hives make way more drones than I would ever give them the foundation for. And I like to think that if the bees need it, they're going to do it. And if they don't need it, they're not going to do it. Who knows if they actually are that on top of things or not. But I try to give them the option. And not only that, but it's really interesting to see how the cells vary a lot in size, even within the worker bee comb and the drone comb. And then once I have drone cells, I will cut them out and I will freeze them. You have to wait until they're capped. And what I found is that I'll see like a little patch of drone cells like around the hive. I don't always see like a whole frame of drone cells. It's just scattered around the hive. And to be honest, if you're looking to trap something, that does seem like the better way to do it. Instead of just having one trap with one frame there on the upper box, why don't you have scattered cells with that are these traps for the drones all over the hive, and that's a better way to trap these varroa mites. But again, I'm just speculating on that one. The other thing that I do for the varroa mites, actually, that's pretty much it, to be honest, is the freezing of the drone comb. Now, I don't freeze like every single time I see drones, but it is mostly in the late summer I will do it. And I usually start out by just opening up some cells, taking like a needle or something, plastic ones that work really well, opening up, like maybe 5 or 10 cells, pulling out the drone and seeing if I see a mite on it. They're really easy to spot on those bright white pupa. And sometimes I've seen like 3, 4 mites just walking around all over this poor little pupa. And if I see that, then I will take that and freeze it and then throw it out. Or if you have chickens, give it to the chickens. They love pupa. And so if I don't have any foundation and there's just a little spot of drone cells, I will just like cut that little spot out and put the rest of the frame back in. And that actually works really well for keeping your bees from swarming because you've now created these little holes within your brood that the bees can go build new comb in and new spots for the queen to lay without having to move frames around and split hives and all that stuff. I saw that David says he wants to add green drone frames. And where do I suggest putting the frames in the brood chamber? Most people put them in the second deep box. And the first is like, where the main brood is. And that's usually what I found in my hives when I don't use foundation. Most of the drone frames are in the second box. That's where the bees choose to put them. And you put at least 2 in there if you can, or you can just pop out a couple frames of foundation and see how that goes. Jim says I put my green drone frames in the second slot of a box last year, and it was full of drones each time I emptied it. um, s- so some people have used powdered sugar, the sugar roll, I think they call it. They put sprinkle powdered sugar on the bees as a way to get them to just clean themselves off, and hopefully the mites fall off. Some people will put screened bottoms on their hive so that if the mites fall off, they fall out of the hive down below. I don't do either of those. The powdered sugar just looked kind of like a mess, and it didn't, as far as I'm aware, I haven't found any research to show that it does anything helpful. And the screen bottoms I found are just make everything worse. In Hawaii, they made my frames moldy, and it just let way too much moisture into the hives, I guess. And my small hive beetle population increased quite a bit, which probably means that it was just a good way for hive beetles as well as Varroa mites to get into the hive and get past the guard bees that are at the entrance. So if you do have a screened bottoms, unless you have a good reason for them, I would stick a corrugated plastic over the screen. Or unless you have the pan full of oil down below. Now that's a whole nother story. That is like my number one way to lower small hive beetle population in my hives. Um, oh, you don't think you say Oahu is not so bad for screen bottom boards? If you say so. I I never had any good results with the screen bottoms. But I guess if you have them in a spot where it's just really hot or you have the sun beating on them, it might be helpful for ventilation. I always had the upper entrance as well. I had like the upper entrance propped up, or I would drill a 3/4 inch hole into those upper supers to give them an upper entrance so that there was extra ventilation, ways for the heat to get out. Okay, so the what I'm hoping to do this year is to look a little bit more into anybody that might be making those heaters for the hives, which heats up the hive high enough that it kills the varroa mites, even the ones in the cells with the pupa, but does not kill any of the bees or the queen. And there was a company that started making them, and it seemed like that company stopped around the time of COVID. And I've heard of other people trying other brands, and it did not go well. So I'm going to really search for some potential places that might be able to do that and that offer them. See, I use screen bottom boards, but also put grub X under my hives, and small hive beetle wasn't too bad. Um, that's great if it works for some people. I really like the oil pan underneath it. I couldn't lay down anything on the soil because there's not my property. But small hive beetles were really, really intense, and that area is very wet, not sunny, not hot. The clouds usually came in around 10, 11 o'clock. It's where I filmed, my videos for the class, and it's never sunny in any of those videos. You might have noticed the sun usually gets covered with clouds around 10, 11 o'clock at the latest. It started to rain by like 11 o'clock most days. Very, very wet. And in those like very wet areas, you really just do not want a screened bottom board. But it can be helpful in the wintertime as a way to let moisture drip out of the hive so that it's not pulling up under there. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about for Varroa mites. Oh boy, it's already 8:40. So I guess I talked quite a bit about Varroa mites. Varoxan, thank you. Yeah, that is the name of the oxalic acid that is the time released in strips that you put into the hive. I saw Man Lake sells it, Better Bee sells it. Man Lake sells smaller quantities. Better Bee just had one and it was like $70. So if you are a member of a bee association, that's really the better route. You see if some people want to chip in with you. Also on Man Lake's website, to they said that they cannot guarantee what the date is for the shelf life of it. So if you want to buy it in advance and you're not going to be using it immediately in your hives, to call them so that they can ship you one that has an expiration date that's a little bit later. This is why I haven't bought any yet, because I don't plan on using it when I first get my bees. I was probably going to put Apivar in or Apiguard and try those strips either in the late summer or fall, or maybe both, if the bees aren't developing resistance. I will warn you, though, that studies have shown that oxalic acid can lead to honeybee mortality to be a little bit greater, and their lifespan is a little bit shorter when they are exposed to higher levels of oxalic acid. So I wanted to talk about one of the students' emails. He said that he saw, he was at a store and he saw that there was small clusters of white flowers covering bushes. And when he got closer, he saw like that there were just honeybees going crazy over this plant. He found out that it is called Japanese knotweed. And the owner of the store offered to invited him to put some hives on the backside of the property, right where the bushes were. So he wanted to know if I could guide him on things he should be aware of. Should I set up a water station for them like I do here? Check them weekly, try to put hives in an area not visible to people. Should I put the hives there early spring or when the flowers are expected to bloom? So those were all great questions, and I asked him if he wouldn't mind that I just talked about them during the live chat, because it's something that I think usually comes up for a lot of beekeepers, is the expansion to other people's properties. And especially if your bees are not doing well, if they are getting a lot of robbing, if they didn't bring in a lot of honey, especially, not enough to sustain themselves and for you to harvest, really, really, really look into moving them somewhere else, because that will make your time as a beekeeper so much more enjoyable when the bees have access to food. There are some yards that I had in Hawaii. The one I put my bees on when I just met my husband, it was the house he was renting. I put them in their yard. It was like a couple acre lot. And I kept them there until, after our son was born. They were there for a few years. And I never once had any of my bees collapse to robbing. I never actually saw excessive robbing. I never even really saw much robbing at all. And I had seen robbing, but not a ton at some of my other yards. And so when your bees are in a really great spot, when there's a lot of food, things like robbing is not a problem like it is. Now, there's always just the exception. There's just that year where a hurricane came and blew all the tiny little flowers off of the bushes right when they were about to bud. But for the most part, if your bees are in a great spot, a lot of the problems that might come up for you won't, because they just have access to a ton of food, which makes them a lot healthier. So the easiest one to answer is you check them as often as you want to. You check them as often as you're comfortable to keep them healthy. if anything, you might check them more often than the ones on your own property, because when it's on your property, you don't always have to just go out there and open the hives to see what's going on. But with that one that's not on your property, you have to make the whole trip out there, because otherwise you have no idea what's going on, because there's a good chance they're not going to tell you, even if they did see the bees swarming out of the hive. So definitely you check your bees as often as you think is necessary to keep the bees healthy. And that might be a little bit more often than your own hives on your property. You really do need to have some kind of agreement with them, that they understand that you need to be able to get to the hives whenever you need to. If they need to be moved, that should be done in the evening. If you're pulling honey, that's going to be a time that there's a lot of bees flying around. You do not want them to be spraying those flowers, or really ideally any of the area if they can help it. But it's not horrible if they're spraying the weeds in between the cracks of the sidewalk, but hopefully they're not spraying where all of those flowers are blooming. And you can just put bees on a property when you know that flower's blooming, if you want to, but that's a lot of work. um, when you start to do that, you're now turning into like the company I worked for. They move their bees 3 times a year to harvest honey from these 3 very specific blooms. And it's just hard work. It's a pain in the butt to move a beehive. And if you look to move your hive right before the expected bloom in July, that hive is going to be big. It's like 2 deeps, and there might already be a super on top, hopefully. And so you need someone to help you to pick up those bees. And I'm telling you, they're going to hate you when you move them. Nighttime or not, they still you're going to get stung moving them. Not necessarily when you put them on your truck, but you're going to put them on your truck, and you're going to cover them maybe with like a mosquito net or something. And then you're going to move them. If you do have one of those mouse guards that has the option to turn it around so that the bees can't get out, but they have ventilation, definitely do that so they can't get out. Because when you move them, you put them on a truck, you move them somewhere else. When you take them off the truck, that's when they are like, hate you. They hate the world. They don't care they're going to die. They are just going to sting the first living thing that they see, kind of way about them. And so it's really, I just don't recommend it. You have to like really want to get that extra bit of honey to move your bees, especially in the late summer like that. Now if it's like, I guess, end of August and your hives are small again, it might not be as difficult, but moving bees is kind of a pain. It requires help, and they're just not happy when you do it. But yeah, you really don't want it like on the road so that the headlights from cars are shining into the hive, or that people are going to be walking by it. I wouldn't so much worry that like someone's gonna stop by and try to steal them. I mean, you hear about that sometimes, or people vandalize beehives, but it's more so just the vibration of the ground. If it's like right on a road where big trucks are going by and stuff, they'll be fine. They will deal with it, but it's not ideal. So ideally, you would have it a little bit set back from the road, or not have like the front entrance facing the bush, so that like people won't see it when they're driving by or walking by with the store. Um, the water station, the place I worked at had water stations, but it was a requirement for their organic certification. They had to have them. They would have small like water troughs and some plants, like water lilies on the top and some mosquito eating fish inside. And they would put them out. Actually, they wouldn't have the fish in it, but they would have the plants. And they would put that at every bee yard. That is definitely something I would recommend doing. I never did it the places I kept my bees, but it was a very lush, wet area. And the one property, the lady next door had two donkeys, and she said that the bees went to the donkey's water source. So I just uh, left them to go hang out with the donkeys and never gave them anything. But especially if it's near a store or if it's going to be near, there's a neighborhood nearby, or if it's a dry area, you're going to want to put a water source and the troughs or a large, bucket, flower pot kind of thing that you can fill up with water is preferable with the plants because, those smaller water sources, you're just going to have to go out there every single week and have to refill it, which is a little bit of a pain. One other thing is if you keep bees somewhere that's not at your home, you really want to think about what you're going to be doing with your smoker. Some places have somewhere that you can dispose of it. They have a hose or something like that, somewhere you can put it and make sure it's out. Um, the farm I worked for had a thing on the outside of the truck that they would put their smoker so that it wasn't in or on the truck. You don't want to be driving with a lit smoker. So that's another thing to consider. Maybe you just have a spray bottle with syrup inside it. There was somebody, I think he said he was in Australia, that contacted me about trying his smokeless smoker. So there are smokers that are like that you can use. I don't know how well that they work, but you just want to figure out what you're going to do with that thing so that you're not putting it in your truck, uh, or car, whatever you happen to be driving. I had a car and just put my equipment and my bees and everything in the back of my hatchback. But the smoker, I had a spot that I left some of that stuff so that I didn't have to worry about bringing that in. And you want to make sure that it's not lit still when you're leaving the property and everything. Um, so let me know if you have any more questions about that. I think putting your bees on your own property helps allow you to be a responsible beekeeper while minimizing potential conflict with neighbors not close to you and not under your control. Um, yeah, it will help you to check your bees more often and um, keep swarming at bay, but it's just not always possible for everybody. And I would rather encourage people to keep your bees somewhere else if it means that it's better for the bees. A lot of people want to keep their bees somewhere convenient. That was a mistake I made my first year. I wanted it to be convenient for me instead of having a 30-minute drive. And it wasn't good for the bees. They were downtown and there wasn't a lot of food, and it was in a neighborhood. And no matter where they went, if they swarmed, it was not going to be good news for them. If I had put them on that property that I was thinking about, if they had swarmed, there was a small possibility that they would have at least made it, and there wasn't any other residences close by, and they would have been a lot healthier. So you really just have to weigh all of your options, and figure out what's best for your bees. I will just warn you that those hives get heavy, so I would put them there when they are small and not. You can move them back to your home, like when you're closing the hive up for winter, because that's when it definitely is better to have them close by so that you can be a responsible beekeeper and keep an eye on them and make sure that they're okay without worrying about, having to traipse out there when it's snowing out or whatever. But The rest of the year, it really varies in where you're having your bees. Smokers drive me nuts. Mine takes me forever to get going, and then after I'm done with the inspection, the smoker keeps on going strong. My timing is off. Yeah, a cork or a good stick. If you have like the right size stick, hold on to it, because you know the smoker needs air. So if you cut off the air supply, um, that will help make it go out. But you know it's takes a while, and you still need to put the embers somewhere afterwards. So that's just the tricky part about putting your bees on another property too. Just how are you supposed to dispose of this safely? You don't want to be accused of setting someone's business on fire. But you know, then there's a possibility that they would be taking some of your honey and selling it in their store. And then, yeah, that's the other thing. Before you put your bees there, talk to them, ask them, do they want some compensation and what would that be? And make sure that you're both on board with that. You know, you don't need to like have like this formal contract, but make sure that you have some kind of conversation about it. If you put your honey for sale in a local mom and pop store, what would be a fair percent to give to the store owner? A lot of stores are it's usually a 30% markup. If like you're selling it to them and then they're selling it, then usually you they just add a 30% markup. If it's like a consignment kind of thing where you're putting your honey there and if it sells, you give them a portion of the proceeds, it could be anywhere from 30 to 50%. The smaller shops, you know, like the little boutique shops, they're usually upping the price 50%. If they, you know, if you're just like giving it to them as a thank you, like a gift, then it might be a little bit less than 30%. If you think that they're benefiting from it in some way, having the bees there, other than, you know, that they're doing their part to help beekeepers and help the bees, and the you know, but if there's something else that they're getting from it, otherwise usually the 30% is pretty average for the shops. Most people, some property owners have not asked for anything. One guy, I would try to give him, I would get, he asked for 1 jar of honey a year. Once I tried to give him two and he like gave it back. And I was like, I just need one. I was like, give it to a friend, like whatever. He was like, no, I just want 1 jar of honey. Uh, I was like, well, give it to the guy that caretakes for your property. He's like, no, he doesn't need that. Uh, anyway, it's that's all I can really think of on that topic. If anyone has any more questions about it, leave it in the chat, or you can email me later. I also have a YouTube video, and on my channel, there's one of the playlists. If you scroll down, is like beekeeping business, along those lines. And one of the chats I talk about getting paid to keep bees on someone's property, which is along the same lines, but a little bit beyond that. And that used to be like a really great source of income for me. I had bees on at a hotel, and then one other person, like a private residence, wanted bees there, and I kept bees for them, and it was great to have that monthly income. So that's kind of like a whole nother thing, but that's only for businesses or nonprofits or people that want to um, use it as like marketing, or they want a portion of the honey and they might be, you know, paying you to take care of the bees for them. But whenever you do put bees on someone else's property, one added benefit oftentimes for them is a tax break. Here in Pennsylvania, we have the Clean and Green Act, and if you are making at least $2,000 in ag sales from whatever you are raising, growing, harvesting on your property, you can get a tax break or qualify for it. And in Hawaii, you had to have like 5 beehives for every acre or something, and you got an ag tax break. Now, the taxes in Hawaii are so low, it's hardly worth it the way it is here in Pennsylvania. But that can also be another added benefit. So if you're talking to someone, they might not even know it. Make sure to mention that if that is the case in your state or wherever you happen to live. All right, I'm gonna head out because it is 9:02. Thank you guys for joining me. It's nice to talk to you. Nice to see my Hawaii students. And if you have questions you want me to talk about in a video, let me know. Send me an email. It's nice to add in other things to some of my topics. And I will see you hopefully next month on the first Friday. Take care.